Hey mama, you're listening to Coach the Mother, where postpartum recovery gets real, raw, and deeply rooted in who we are. I'm Dr. Natalie Forsell. I'm a pelvic floor expert, postpartum fitness coach, and mama who's walked the long road back to herself. Here, we're ditching the outdated BS, we're demystifying healing, reclaiming strength, and giving the modern mom the wisdom she should have been handed from the beginning. This isn't about bouncing back, it's about returning home to your body, your power, and your whole damn self. Let's coach the mother. In my last podcast, I shared openly about my story. There's obviously so much to go into detail there, but this next episode, I want to talk about what is postpartum. What is the definition of this thing? What does it even mean? And are there differences of what this means in different places to different people? So one of the first things that comes to mind when I think about the word, what does postpartum mean? I think of that quote from Juno, the movie, and I wrote down the quote. It says, I hate when adults use the term sexually active. What does it even mean? And I'm going to deactivate someday, or is it a permanent state of being? And I think you could almost just put the word postpartum in there and it makes sense. So when we use the word postpartum, what does that even mean? And are you going to become non-postpartum? Is that going to deactivate, or is it a permanent state of being? What a beautiful question. When it comes to the clinical definition of postpartum, I am seeing some trends change about what that means, but from a medical standpoint, from many different places, it is still outdated. And the Cleveland Clinic says postpartum is about 6 to 8 weeks. It is based on the recovery timeline of tissue healing, and some changes can last a little bit beyond that, but 6 to 8 weeks, Cleveland Clinic. The World Health Organization defines postpartum period as beginning immediately after the baby is born and extending up to 6 weeks, 42 days after birth, emphasizing the critical importance for the newborn and the mother. The American Academy of Family Physicians says that the fourth trimester, or the postpartum period, is 12 weeks after delivery. And surprisingly, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has acknowledged that the 6 weeks postpartum checkup is outdated and postpartum should be considered a continuum, not a single event. That's nice to hear. However, functionally speaking, our medical system still functions that the 6-week checkup is the postpartum endgame. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because from that standpoint, why is there just this one 6 or 8 week postpartum checkup and then it's a sayonara, see you later situation? The biggest authorities of medical care for women in our country have for decades annotated that the 6-week mark is the end of postpartum care. So when it comes to tissue healing, in 6 weeks, your uterus should go from the shape of a watermelon back down to a little orange. It should contract back down to its almost normal size and shape. Tissue healing with wound closure means that any type of tearing or ripping, the tissue has come back together, it has healed, and it is no longer bleeding. Those are the baseline of this 6-week checkup, this postpartum care. But from my clinical perspective as a practitioner, 6 weeks is the very beginning of the healing journey. And if we just stay with that for a little bit, when it comes to that 6-week checkup, yes, you don't have an open wound anymore. Hopefully bleeding has almost or completely subsided. Hopefully your uterus is back down to a familiar shape and size for healing recovery. But what about everything else? What about your extended and stretched out muscles from your core, your pelvic floor, the atrophy of the muscle tone you've lost in your core, your glutes, your low back, and posture? Everything from posture has changed. You're probably forward shouldered, the weight of your heavy breasts on the front Now we're carrying a newborn, a lot of sitting and rounding, or maybe you have a big sway back posture that remained from having to carry your belly, right? So did you tuck your hips under and clench your booty and hinge back on your hips? So you had this backward lean while you were trying to support your pregnant belly, or did you do that sway back posture? There's so much that changes. Rib flaring. I could name 100,000 changes in your body that happen from going through a full-term pregnancy and then where you're at the beginning of your postpartum. So 6 weeks is just the beginning of a healing timeline. I've seen in my own body that it takes a solid 1 to 2 years for things to feel familiar again in terms of my muscle mass, if I'm really intentional with it, right? If I'm trying to scaffold my training and rebuild my core and glutes, retrain my posture, try to correct the rib flare as much as possible. All of these things you took 10 months to slowly deviate and stretch out these muscles and change your posture. And now on the backside, it takes a good chunk of time to come back to yourself with intention. And it doesn't happen without intention, right? If you go through birth and you do absolutely nothing to regain the strength that's lost, sure, you might be back to your baby weight or maybe even lighter than your baby weight because we lost so much muscle mass, right? So clinically speaking, 6 weeks is the starting point, and it takes a good year at least to heal from the changes that you accumulate in your body from birth. Sometimes it takes longer. And then, if you are in this childbearing phase of life where you have a baby and then another baby within less than a year apart, or they're less than 2 years apart, or maybe your babies are farther apart, they're 3 and 4 years apart, but you never really intentionally healed between these births to regain some of the stability and control for your spine, for your glutes, for your core, for your posture, and then you have multiple births, the chronicity of the symptoms that you're experiencing just compound on one another. So your postpartum journey is a super long period of time. Maybe it's a full decade of going through pregnancy, postpartum, and there isn't a lot of intention to healing between some of these births. So whatever, maybe there's something that popped up in your first pregnancy or second pregnancy, some leaking, some pelvic pain, some back pain, and you never fully address it. So pregnancy by pregnancy, it gets worse. You have now created some chronic issues, chronic dysfunction in your postpartum body. And that is a long-term recovery game. So when I think of that Juno quote and it says, do you ever get deactivated or is this just a permanent state of being? That is how I view postpartum. It is giving birth is the initiation into a different chapter of your life, into this postpartum chapter. And then the next chapter, physiologically speaking, is like menopause, right? And so between the pre-baby time of life, this postpartum experience can be a long-term experience for us. And I do appreciate the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists that they are acknowledging that it is a continuum, which is great, but I think it's going to take, unfortunately, at least another decade or longer for some research to come out and for some narratives to change, for the system itself to change. And that is how the process of new medical knowledge and research reaches the public. Of maybe they're starting to name some of these things right now, but when will it actually impact the system, impact the medical model, and impact the reimbursement nature of our insurance, if that ever happens at all? It's going to be a long time coming. So the point of this podcast is to start to think about this. What is postpartum to you? What have you been told that it looks like? What does your doctor talk about postpartum like to you? Does that align with what you believe? Or are you feeling like postpartum is something that nobody really talks enough about, that you have no clue what to really expect? That is the point of this podcast series is episode by episode, we're going to break down what are some of the previous expectations or the gaps of knowledge that moms deserve to know and have about this postpartum journey so that you can feel better prepared, better equipped. And the third and final part about the postpartum experience that is so individual and unique to every mom, but is worth talking about in a future episode, is this emotional and spiritual initiation of this new side of ourselves and how that impacts everything. How we compartmentalize ourselves into different lanes. We think about our bodies, and then we think about our minds and hearts, and then we think about our spirituality, and they're all in these different houses. But when we can separate ourselves out like that, it can be really hard to truly heal and to feel retethered back to ourselves. That's one of my theories about why we have such big identity crises as moms when we go into this postpartum journey of we get ripped apart and we're trying to figure out how to knit all of the pieces that we value about ourselves back together, or how they fit now because things are different, and how that impacts our sense of self. When our sense of self is impacted and self-esteem is at an all-time low, that impacts how much time and attention we are giving to our bodies to heal. That impacts how we have conversations with our partners to advocate for what we feel we need in our bodies, what we know feels off, but we might have a hard time using our voice or advocating for what we need because you can see everyone else's needs in your family, right? And you can see the long list of what the other children need, what your spouse needs, what the home needs. And so that plays into what prolongs this postpartum healing journey for us, is because we so easily can fall to the very bottom of the priority list. We are so fractured because we feel so out of body and disconnected from some pieces of ourselves that we can't heal. So this is my hope for you and Coach the Mother. If you want to learn more about how I help moms heal from home, regain their strength, heal their core, heal their pelvic floor, but also get to retether themselves, get some support from how your life is changing and how you want to show up for yourself and how you want to change the narrative around how you view yourself and how you engage your family. I do all of that with you inside the complete postpartum recovery program. In the show notes below, I have a link to the website so you can check out all the details. You can apply straight from there. You can DM me on Instagram to ask any and all questions. I'm so glad you joined me here today for Coach the Mother on what is postpartum.